see what he's been doing with this perception action laboratory, and really particularly his work with affordances. I know this is a baby that he's been diving into much deeper as well, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about this. So it's going to be a little slight spin as opposed to the two presentations that we heard prior to this point, but I have no doubts that it will be equally as riveting. So Tom, thank you so much for being here. Take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks all of you for being here. It's a pleasure to be part of this. In fact, I do want to begin by thanking Sean. Sean, I'm thanking you, Sean. I want to begin by thanking Sean for putting this together and for having the courage to take these ideas that Carl and Rob and I have been talking about today. I'd just like to point out that this stuff is really heterodox. This is the minority view. It's recent, it's weird, it's difficult for a lot of academic researchers to understand. It really takes a lot of courage for Sean to come to grips with this stuff and to promote it. So I think he's doing a great thing here. I think we all learned good things. I would also like to thank you. I'm here in part for selfish reasons. I am a pointy-headed ivory tower academic. I'm not an athlete. You do not want to see me shooting free throws. You absolutely do not. Much less dribbling. And kidding aside, as an academic researcher, I don't have much opportunity to come into contact with people who deal with real-world issues in the phenomena that I study. So it's a rare and very instructive pleasure for me to be able to meet you guys and to see, what the problems really are. What kinds of things are you dealing with in terms of motor skill and performance and that kind of stuff. There is a contrast between what I'm going to talk about and what the previous speakers talked about. So Carl and Rob, if I hope they don't mind me characterizing their talks, talked about motor skill, and motor skill learning. And they focused on movements in terms of the dynamics of movements and the variability of movements and stuff like that. But in all cases, in all the examples they gave, the desire, certainly of the person performing the movements, and the desire of the scientist studying those movements was to understand relationships between the movement and the outcomes between the movements and performance. How do we assemble dynamic patterns of coordination to achieve the performance that we want to achieve, that sort of stuff? Well, I am not going to be doing that. I have done some of that work, and I might have talked about that, but I'm not going to be talking about that work today. What I'm looking at is relations between movement on one hand and side effects that often have nothing to do with the nominal performance goal. In fact, side effects that are absolutely not desired and not wished at all. And that is primarily concussion. So I'm using MTBI and concussion as interchangeable terms here. You all know, I'm sure, that concussion is a public health problem. There are millions of concussions every year in this country alone. You get them in adults. The currently widely known case to the general public is the NFL, but they occur commonly in lots of settings, not just sports. They're a serious problem for the military in terms of troops under fire and that kind of stuff. And people falling down on the job, so forth. They also occur increasingly in children. Primarily this is youth athletics, such as football and soccer, but kids also fall down in various places where that happens. So millions of concussions a year is a lot, and nobody wants a concussion. Concussions are bad. We want to prevent them. We want them to not happen. We want to move in ways that will make them not happen. So, of course, once somebody gets a concussion, we'd like to help them. Yeah, that's uncontroversial. But I'm going to remind you that what we would most like to do, ideally, is to prevent them from happening in the first place. It would be much better to prevent concussions than to deal with the consequences. So, I'm not a concussion researcher, I'm not a physician, I'm not a clinician. I got into this, I'll explain my personal journey into this about 25 slides from now. I got into this pretty much by accident, and I knew nothing about concussions until I started doing this research. And I have spent quite a bit of time looking around trying to understand a little bit about what concussions are and what kind of research is being done about them. And again, it won't surprise you, but a lot of research is being done. When you have millions of concussions every year, you're going to get some research focused on what's going on with that. And as far as I've been able to tell, and maybe some of you can help to enlighten me, but as far as I've been able to tell, there are basically two kinds of research going on about concussion nowadays. Number one is ways to prevent it from happening, what I refer to as before concussion, and in the research that I've been able to identify, this mostly comprises efforts towards education. So people who might be at risk of getting concussions, you educate them so that they, have safer behaviors, if you will. You can go into rule changes when you're dealing with sports. You can go into rule changes and say, okay, we're just not going to allow you to do this thing anymore. And I believe, is it this year that the NFL has instituted a ban on certain types of blocks, specifically because they are associated with concussions. So, okay, if you don't let people do the things that are associated with concussions, then you can hope that there might be fewer of them. And then finally, there's research looking into risk factors, what are commonly called risk factors, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The other large category of research on concussions that I've been able to identify is stuff about what happens after somebody gets concussed. You might call that the response to concussion or the attention recovery phase or whatever. And there's a great deal of research going on in terms of diagnosis. It's really important to know when somebody has a concussion as opposed to when they've been hit and they don't have a concussion. So there's just a tremendous amount of research going into this. And curiously enough, Carl talked a lot about postural activity and postural control and postural movement and all that kind of stuff. One of the big areas of research looking at ways to diagnose concussion nowadays is in the context of exactly this kind of stuff, postural control and the quantitative kinematics, the fine details of the way people move. Talk about that a little bit later on. And again, to the best of my knowledge, the other big area of research currently is in the concept of biomarkers, that is to say, looking for changes in the body, chemical changes, neuronal changes, something inside the body that can tell us for sure whether somebody in fact has had a concussion or not. And then finally, once you determine that somebody has a concussion, you want to know when they get over it. And a lot of research is being done to try and identify more quantitative, more objective ways for us to understand when somebody is okay again, particularly in the context of return to play decisions, but just in general, we'd like to know when people are really over it. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So to put a little bit more detail into the prevention end of this, as I already mentioned, existing efforts are focused on identification of risk factors and or on educating people to avoid risks. So a tremendous amount of sort of epidemiological research has gone into what are situations, what are activities, what are behaviors that are associated with concussion. The biggest one, and I'm sure you guys all know much of what is on these first slides, the biggest one is the history of prior concussion. If you've had a concussion, you are at hugely increased risk of getting another concussion. So, okay, that's really well documented. Collision sports are a risk factor, falling down, car accidents, and these are well understood things. Education, again, we're talking about prevention, and primarily education focuses on making sure people know what the risky things are and tell them not to do it. And we already mentioned rule changes. You can just say, you're not allowed to do risky things anymore. As I said, there's a great deal of research on this stuff. The items you see on the screen here, I think, are not very surprising. It's nice to have them well documented, but as I said, there's not a lot of surprise there. If we look at response, coping with people who've been injured and who may or may not have concussions and that sort of stuff. The postural testing and the phenomena of postural sway in relation to concussion are relatively new. They sort of came out of left field for the clinical community, I think, and they're really quite a big deal. I can't remember the name of the guy who's really famous for this, but he got a MacArthur Genius Award, the guy who did some of the formula research to show that the quantitative kinematics of body sway had something to do with blows to the head. That guy got a Genius Award. I hear the whisper, what's his name? Yeah, but what's his name? Yeah. Yes, thank you. I can't pronounce it, but I can recognize it. Anyway, so yeah, it's now very well documented that the brain injury, and let's remember, concussion is a brain injury. The brain injury that constitutes concussion leads to changes in the quantitative details of body movement. And we can measure those, and we can use that as a way to provide an objective indicator of who actually has a concussion as opposed to who got hit in the head and doesn't have a concussion. So, diagnosis. This technique is also being used to track recovery. So you can bring people in every day, every week, measure their sway over and over again, see how it changes over time, and see when it's returned to the way it's supposed to be, if you will. And then separately, you've got this issue of biomarkers, and there's a fair amount of research being done in the hope that you could have not a motoric diagnosis indicator for concussion, but a chemical or physiological. Well, this stuff is good. All of this stuff is good, but it's not exhaustive. And what I'm here today to talk to you about is a very different approach to looking at concussion and something useful that we might be able to do about it. And that new approach, as it says here, is centered around the concept that there might be individual differences in susceptibility to MTBI, to concussion. So a lot of the existing research on risk factors has focused on things outside the individual. And we already saw this. So this is obviously something that's part of the history of the individual, but these things are outside the individual. And you can understand, yeah, these certainly are risk factors, but they're risk factors outside the individual. A car accident is a risk factor for everybody, regardless of who you are. What I'm talking about is the possibility that there might be individual differences in people that render them more or less susceptible to the brain injury that can result from head trauma. Rather than look at risk factors in terms of activities or situations, I'm talking about looking at risk factors in terms of individual differences. And in particular, as you'll see, in terms of individual differences in the way that we move. Well, individual differences are common. You guys, I put this stuff in and I realized as I was listening to stuff today that I probably didn't need to put this stuff in because you guys know all about it. Individual differences in susceptibility are common for all kinds of clinical conditions. I give a gruesome example here. In the Middle Ages, everybody in Western Europe was exposed to the plague bacillus. Lots of people died, but not everybody got the disease. So being exposed to it didn't guarantee that you got it. There were individual differences in susceptibility to this particular infection. That's just an example. There are individual differences in susceptibility to lots of disease states or infections or whatever. And so I'm just taking that well-understood concept and applying it to quite a different domain, but one that it really, to the best of my knowledge, has not been applied to before. Right now, I'm going to use motion sickness as a sort of a metaphor or an analogy. In a few slides from now, we'll see that the connection is even more intimate than that. For right now, let's just look at this in terms of individual differences in susceptibility. Think about your own life history. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. I used to do that, but it's embarrassing. So don't raise your hand. Just think about raising your hand. Have you ever had motion sickness? Don't raise your hand. Those of you who have, you know darn well that you have. Those of you who haven't, Yeah, well, that's different. There aren't very many years. Anyway, motion sickness is a natural response of otherwise healthy people to certain motion situations. And there's a whole field there. I've studied this for a long time, and other people have. There's all kinds of stuff we're going to about that we don't need to talk about today. The main thing is simply the fact, for now, simply the fact that the motion sickness is naturally characterized, is uncontroversially characterized by individual differences. So, you have a ship with 1,000 people on it. The ship moves, 300 people get seasick and 700 of them don't. Okay, so that's the motion stimulus is the same for everybody. Some people get sick, some people don't. Those are individual differences. Everybody knows about car sickness. Some people get car sick, some people don't. Well, you have 5 people in the car and 2 of them get sick. Those are individual differences because the motion of the car is the same for everybody. So this is an absolutely uncontroversial aspect, or just part of the phenomenology, part of the phenomenon of motion sickness.